Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us again in another safety forum. This subject carries from the previous subjects we've talked about with fatigue and threats and so forth. So, as always, I'm going to talk for a little bit, but then I would love your participation. I would love your questions. I would love your comments, your contributions to the subject. There are a lot of experts in this field, a lot of folks with some pretty strong experience levels. So, this is not my committee or Angel Flight's West committee. This is all of our committee. This belongs to all of us. Every safety structure belongs to all of us. It's not a one-person show. It's a team sport. So, without further ado, the subject is the five hazardous attitudes, and I struggled with that quite a bit, actually. It seems very normal and very known because I recall back from my days as a student, that was quite a while ago, as a student at Embry-Riddle. As a freshman, I remember being taught that prior to my first solo at 17, but it didn't quite register. I understood it. Um, I considered it, but I've kind of ignored it. I didn't have the bandwidth for it. And I think a lot of folks, when they learn to fly, they're so focused on the task and the process and all the regulations and all the things they have to memorize, that human factors aspect of aviation is not easy to penetrate, the thinking. I would say that for me personally, it didn't start kind of registering until I was a CFI student, when I was becoming a CFI and learning about how to deal with other students and how to deal with those attitudes in the event I would face them in my students. And even at that time, what was interesting was I didn't give it the importance that I think it deserved in the sense that I couldn't wrap my head around it. I couldn't understand it. Why would anybody be anti-authority? Why would anyone have a macho attitude when it came to flying? I kind of dismissed it as something very esoteric or very extreme. But so what I wanted to do with this article and this conversation was to kind of talk about the subtle ways that these attitudes can creep into our way of thinking, not talk a little bit about some of the extreme situations, and also solicit your input on that. And I'm gonna try to leave you with a little bit of a plot twist at the end, just something for us to think about, and because it is kind of a touchy subject. I have a very good friend who's a DPE, actually. He's a fellow United pilot, but he's also a DPE, a designated pilot examiner. And when I wanted to talk to him about it, because he told me that he assesses and evaluates the knowledge of the five hazardous attitudes with all his applicants, and that's from private pilot level and above, which I found interesting. And so I wanted to talk more about it with him and with other DPs as well. And through my check airman background and so forth, I wanted to really see how it applies to GA. And that's what's different from a structured environment of an airline or a professional organization to the environment we have here, where we have 1,600 pilots of all kinds of backgrounds, right? So yeah, and then I talked, oh, before I get into that, I talked about the hero trap, right? The specific application of those attitudes in relation to philanthropic flying. And the hero trap is basically when the desire to begins to influence operational issues. So when you have our operational judgment, when the desire to do something good, when the intention to do something good is influenced, right, because of these attitudes. So it's a little more subtle. So let's talk about it. Jess, if you don't mind putting up the slide, great, thank you. So the first one, I'll just read them off. Anti-authority. The quote is, "Don't tell me what to do." Risk obviously is ignoring regulations, SOPs, or ATC instructions, and the antidote plainly is follow the rules. They're usually right. And I would also add to that is that there's really no downside by following the rules. Right. And now the only downside one would say is the fact that we are a little bit constricted and constrained and we can't do the fun stuff that we want to do. Well, that has no place in Angel Flight West. It has no place in philanthropic flying. It has no place in aviation, really. It doesn't mean we don't get to do things when we fly GA. We can go from point A to point B in a VFR and, not have to follow specific routes and so forth like we do in Part 121, Part 135, and especially IFR. But still, there are regulations that do bound us. So that's for the anti-authority. Impulsivity. Do something quickly. That's not usually a good thing in aviation. Risk acting without thinking through consequences. Then the antidote, of course, is not so fast. Think and first prepare for the appropriate departure with appropriate departure and arrival briefings. I would also say that to that I added the departure and arrival briefings because I think that's the time we need to um, go from the known to the unknown and vice versa. Meaning, if we prepare for the potential threats that are out there, the more we prepare, the less likely we will be impulsive when it comes to reacting to a non-normal situation. So, adding to that as an antidote is constant, repetitive, perpetual training, right? And we've asked that before. What can we do as a safety stand down, if you will, is to step out of our comfort zone, maybe not fly with our buddy who gives us our flight review or instrument proficiency check, fly with someone that actually might intimidate us a little bit or someone we don't know so well so we actually can perform better. That will help with impulsivity in the future. Invulnerability, it won't happen to me. Risk, underestimating risk, weather, fatigue, aircraft issues, and of course the antidote is it could happen to me. And that's easier said than done. I will tell you that my first exposure to that was when I was a student at Embry-Riddle. I had a friend, still have a friend. He's Austrian. I just hang out with the other foreign students, and we were just geeks. We had no life. We just studied and worked. We couldn't identify with the American culture, so that's all we did. So he was a top student, and we were both in the multi-engine program at the time. We were in Prescott, Arizona. The elevation in Prescott is high, it's 5,000 feet. So in the summer, in a non-turbocharged airplane, the performance single engine is very poor. As a matter of fact, the single engine service ceiling is well below the elevation, like by a couple of thousand feet in the summer, which means a single engine does not going to provide you with the performance to continue flying. But we had to train for that. So Chris was with one of the top instructors being trained, and they also had an observer because Riddle had they still do, they call it a Gemini program where you would have two students paired up, and then you would go somewhere, do maneuvers, the person in the back would watch and learn, and then they would swap. It was very rewarding and a good way to learn. So they're in the pattern performing single engine approaches, and because of the performance, we had to learn certain power settings to simulate what good performance would be in the winter, even though it was summer. So there was a lot of negotiating that we had to do with the performance of the airplane, but more specifically, we had to be super creative with energy management. And you know where I'm going with this. So they basically ended up landing gear up because you had to wait for the gear to the very last minute because you didn't have the performance for it. And that shook me, I have to say, to see that one of the top students, top instructor, they all worked out okay. It was good. Nothing happened to them, but it was in a gross error. So that was my first initiation to the concept it can happen to me. Fast forward years of doing flight safety work for the Airline Pilots Association and having represented countless crews in flight safety investigations. I will tell you that that's been the thing that I took out the most from all of those that I've done is that I watched highly professional, studious, dedicated crews make an error. And as a crew, as an individual, and what I always thought is like, yeah, it most certainly can happen to me. If it happened to them, it can certainly happen to me. So I always take a step back when I hear someone criticizing someone else about what they did and how they did it, especially in today's world in social media. You see that a lot. And so I've taken it upon myself to go, you might want to rethink that because we have seen the most qualified, safety conscious individuals make an error. And we're all susceptible to that. So if you have an attitude of it can't happen to me, you might want to rethink that. It's my only takeaway from that. Macho, I can do it. I'll show them taking the necessary risks to prove skill, and the antidote, obviously, taking chances is foolish and unbecoming of a professional aviator or any kind of aviator. I have to say that one I can't quite wrap my head around. That seems excessive to me, but I will also discuss how I think that attitude can creep up in subtly It might not appear as arrogance, it might actually creep up into our decision-making process. And lastly, resignation. What's the use? The risk is giving up in abnormal emergency situations, and the antidote is, of course, I'm not helpless. I can make a difference. To be more specific, in my opinion, the antidote for resignation is preparation. And preparation involves training, constant studying, constant assessment of what you have and debriefing, not allowing an opportunity to be lost if something didn't go on well in a flight, but no one else knew about it and you knew about it, debrief it to yourself, so why. And we've talked about that before in other articles, what went well and why, and what could have gone better and why. Do that on every flight. In the airline world, it's mandatory. It's a graded item, right? So if it's graded there, maybe we should take that on. Um, Jess, you can leave that up if you want. Probably better for people to look at that instead of me, so they can still hear me. So let me talk a little bit more about how those attitudes can kind of creep up in an indirect sort of way, right? We can experience, let's say, invulnerability by rationalizing deteriorating weather. It's not that, oh, it won't happen to me. It might be more subtle than that. It might be more, I can make this mission. I'll give you a quick example. I was flying a couple of years ago in my little airplane from Boeing Field to Petaluma. It's the longest flight I've ever done. It was by myself. It was 4 hours. And departing Boeing Field, the visibility was very low. It was initially 1,000 RVR, so runway visual range, just 1,000 feet, and then eventually went 2 to 4,000 feet, and it was forecast to stay that way. And the truth is, I had to leave, but and I thought, well, okay, I can find a way to not leave. But I actually asked myself, well, I've done this before in a far more capable airplane, right? We actually trained down to 500 RVR, but I'd never really done it in my small airplane. But I gave myself some outs. Payne Field was nearby, and it was completely clear. And I didn't have passengers. I would never do that with an Angel Flight West. It was legal, and the airplane was capable. My concern was an engine failure after takeoff that would put me back into that fog layer that I would have no recourse. But then again, when I fly at night, it's kind of similar. So I learned some things, and I still think about it. I still think about whether or not the decision was right. It all worked out and went well, which usually it does. But there's a part of me that thinks, was that an expression of invulnerability? I mean, I didn't approach it haphazardly. I had outs, right? But it's just, again, that's a way of being. That's almost a little bit being as a macho attitude, right? I wasn't macho about it, but I actually did say to myself, well, I've done this before many times before, but not in this little airplane, right? So that's how it can creep up on you. So just be mindful of that. Here's an impulsivity can creep up in a way of, hey, I might need to rush this pre-flight. I might need to rush this weather briefing. I might need to stretch my personal minimums because I want to make this flight. And again, this is the threat of philanthropic flying. The intention tends to cloud the judgment. That's the real kicker. That's the one we need to be aware of. And the flight becomes emotionally different from every other flight, and it shouldn't. That's where the danger lies, right? The danger is in the difference of those two considerations. We shouldn't allow that to happen. One thing that I find helps me is once I make these decisions, then I actually step back and step outside of me and the decision as an observer. And I say to myself, okay, now I'm going to put my check airman hat or my DPE hat or my FAA designee hat, and I'm going to observe this flight, and I'm going to see if this person, me, is making the right decision. I know it sounds goofy, but it kind of works, right? You step out of your own, so you're not responsible anymore. You have someone else assessing you and evaluating. And if you think, that person would probably go, yeah, that's not a good idea. Or have you thought of that? It does work. It works for me. So I highly recommend you do that. Once you reach that decision, take a moment, take a time out, step back, observe it from the outside. We do that with ourselves all the time, right? Got the little angel over here and the little devil on the other side, right? This person says, go retire early. It just says, don't do it, right? And so all those things. So it's very similar, right? Is do you have the angel out there looking at you? And we call it angel performance, by the way, when you have a line check, right? We see when we do a line check, we see we address this behavior of a pilot as an angel performance because they're doing their very best to demonstrate their performance because they're in the presence of a check airman. Well, so we understand that that's not necessarily indicative of how they would behave on a daily basis. But and we get trained on how to distinguish that and how to discriminate that. Well, do that to yourselves, right? It's like if this was the ultimately conservative decision, would I still do this? And then go back to what we've talked about many times, the decision of a sure loss, right? That game show theory thing that I bore you with all the time, is this, are we really projecting ourselves forward with this decision? And is the failure potential of that decision something that I can live with? If not, short and quick, say no and step away. That's the expectation of a command pilot or any pilot for that matter. Um, the FAA does have tools for us to manage threats, such as the PAVE acronym you probably heard, pilot, um, um, the airplane, aircraft, environment, and external pressures. We've talked about in previous articles what I like to use, which is from my day job, which is the threat forward briefing, where we have personal threats, environmental threats, and technical threats. Those are, by the way, mandatory for us to brief. They're a graded item as well. So again, if the professional organizations require that those kind of briefings, then we should probably adopt them also. And those will definitely help with handling the creep, if you will, of these hazardous attitudes. Without a doubt, the solution and the antidote to all of these is just a very objective, non-negotiable set of boundaries that need to be established ahead of time, right? And in my experience, I'll jump on a different subject now with the more extreme ones, which I've seen here as well. Because I always used to think, as I said in the macho, the number four there, I couldn't wrap my head around that. Well, I've seen it here, and I've seen it in other places as well, even in professional organizations. And in my experience, the only resolution to that is a guardrail, is some sort of entity, organization, individual, safety officer, procedures, SOPs that say, or review boards that if you don't comply, you will be, you will face these consequences. And at the end, I'll throw you my little plot twist for all of us to consider. Let me add to this the incredible value of a mission assistant in helping regulate the negative effect of these attitudes. And there's one case, I won't go into detail, that we've had here that was completely attributed to the contribution of a mission assistant, right? And mission assistants are not always pilots, then, but it's okay. It helps if they are in terms of getting into technical things that are specific to these attitudes. But I'd like to empower mission assistants in being aware, not just being along for the ride. And the way to do that at the time, if you sense one of these attitudes creeping up on the person you're assisting, is to have a method of escalation of your assertiveness. And we use a little acronym called the cuss words, CUS. So the C is when you first verbalize that you're concerned. You see something happening, say the word, I'm concerned, right? That steps up that immediately catches someone's attention. Not always. It does for us in the professional world. If I hear one of my crew members say, hey, I'm concerned about this, it makes me turn my head. Like, let's talk more about that. If there's no response into the C word, the concern, then you step it up to the U, which is I'm uncomfortable. Right. So if you see something that's developing in a way that is might not have a point of return, and you say, I'm really uncomfortable with what's happening right now, and I'm really even not aware of what's happening right now. I've lost situational awareness. So I need to have a better explanation, and I need you to come back. and tell me what's going on, or at least enlighten me as to what's going on so that I can understand and not feel uncomfortable. That's valuable. And for the pilots, the command pilots, it's important that we listen to that. And finally, if that doesn't reach the level of response that we want, the S has to do with safety. I feel this is unsafe. That should immediately trigger someone to respond. So we step it up. Well, we had an example of for those of you that are familiar with crew resource management, CRM, that came about in the late 70s, and it was primarily because of an accident of United Airlines in 1978. It was a DC-8 in the Portland area that crashed because they ran out of fuel. So it was what brought up the whole concept of, hey, we need to discuss communication skills among these highly qualified pilots that they seem to break down and result in a perfectly good airplane running out of fuel. Right? It's unimaginable that a DC-8 would run out of fuel, but that happened. And what's interesting was the level of assertiveness from the flight engineer to the captain. There were some personality conflicts, but the basically the engineer went from saying nothing to going from 0 to 60, and he went straight to, we're running out of fuel and you're going to kill us. There was nothing in between. There was no, hey, Captain, I'm concerned about our fuel load here. We need to start going somewhere. Hey, I'm really uncomfortable about our fuel load. Hey, this is unsafe, right? Stepping it up along the way. So that would be my advice for mission assistance, because that one particular individual that came forward that I spoke with and debriefed the command pilot was very apprehensive, but I was so thankful to him for stepping up and speaking up, even though he felt like he was under certificated, if you will, because his certificate levels were well below that of the command pilot. And then after talking to the command pilot, I unfortunately discovered that he had a very poor safety disposition and was not willing to listen to any of these at all. And probably for one of the first times in my life, I saw the full manifestation of these hazardous attitudes. So the resolution there is those guardrails. Like, yeah, well, you can't fly for Angel Fly West anymore, right? So that's extreme though. The vast majority of us don't go out going, you know what? I'm just going to be anti-authority today. I'm going to break a bunch of rules. Or we go fly and we say, you know what? Today I'm going to crash. It never happens that way, right? We don't start the day thinking this is what's going to happen. Those things creep up. So they're very hard to recognize on our own. And so that's why I recommend stepping out of yourself and also empowering your mission assistants to speak up and educate them on what they should be speaking up on, and what's their flight deck and all those good things. Um, I've talked too much, but I'm going to leave you with one thing that I want us to ponder. Right. So we talked about how the vast majority of us don't go out breaking those rules and feeling all impulsive and invulnerable and macho and anti-authority. I think that's the exception. They're out there. You see them, the influencers, whatever they want to, they take risks and those things, and they show a non-safety disposition maybe. But the vast majority are not that way. We talked about how things can creep up. This is the part that has troubled me a little bit. And let me tell you of an example. And it's not a judgment on this particular individual, not associated with Angel Flight West, by the way. And you probably heard of her, Martha Lunken, right? For those of you that don't know her, a highly respected aviator, a mentor to many, a designated pilot examiner, and yet I think it was in 2020 she decided to fly under a bridge. And the result was pretty catastrophic for her in terms of her uh, career, if you will. The FAA demanded an emergency revocation of all her certificates, and it was executed. And what troubles me is that I respect deeply this individual, right? She has written so many articles on safety, and she's respected. She's great. She's a mentor to so many people. She's an excellent pilot, all those things. Yet somehow, at that moment, found a reason. She's perfectly capable of flying under a bridge. Their skill set is not in doubt here. And again, I'm not judging her decision. I'm not judging the outcome. What I am just contemplating and putting out there is the consideration that how can someone who's so well respected, so capable, uh, decide to do something that's so clearly wrong. What's great about her is that post event, She went back and got all her certificates and all those things, which takes a lot of work. So tip my hat to her. But she's also very vocal about it, right? She discusses it and talks about, what her thought process was and so forth. I will also say something that I've said to all my past students and so forth. There's nothing that anyone can do anymore without the whole world knowing it, right? If you think you can get away with something in today's world, it's not going to happen. I used to tell even my United students that every flight, every landing, every takeoff is being filmed by someone because it is. I mean, look at every accident that's out there. I mean, I think of our 777 that took off out of San Francisco and its wheel fell off. I don't know if you all remember that. And it was grateful that no one got hurt or killed with a big thing falling off the airplane. Well, sure enough, there was a video of it with the whole wheel falling off. I'm like, how on God's green earth did someone video that? Well, that's how it is. So, unfortunately for Martha, also there were drones that were filming the bridge and that was filmed. So I don't have an answer to this. I don't have an answer why someone with such a degree, an undisputed degree of professionalism, would succumb to these attitudes. And for me personally, that was a real wake-up call. Yet again, this can happen to me. Not only can I make a mistake, I can also be complacent. I can be act in an anti-authority way. And even though I think I'm respected by my peers and I really strive to do well and be a perfectionist in the field, and yet I can make that kind of mistake, which seems to be so purposeful. And that really had my head scratching. I still don't have an answer for it. That's my plot twist. I'm putting it out there for everyone to contemplate and think. And again, no judgment to Martha at all. As a matter of fact, I'm so grateful that in a way happened, in the way it happened, and the way she was so vocal about it and accountable, because it's remarkable, to do that. So that's what I'm going to leave you with. And you don't all have to answer now about that one specifically, but I'd love to hear your experiences with these attitudes in yourselves, others, your remedies for it, and what you think might be the reason for a breakdown to something as simple as a very clear boundary and, as I said earlier, a guardrail to doing something and yet still doing it. So thanks for your time and any questions, comments. And by the way, thanks for everyone who responded to the article. I had some really good feedback from folks, and that was great. And again, it's always welcome. So all ears, and my email is available. My phone's available. You can call me anytime, any absolute time. If I'm sleeping, my phone's off. So you can call me, text me, and I'll get back to you with any questions, comments, or any discussions. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Alexi. I really appreciate insight on this. Opening up questions, comments.
It looks like we had one from Ron. He said our mission assistants invited to all of the AFW webinars. And correct me if I'm wrong, Jess, but we send out the video links to everybody, all of our volunteers that we have, including, command pilots and mission assistants and Earth Angels as well. So everyone gets the link to these meetings.
Yes, absolutely. And if anyone missed it, we can resend out the YouTube channel where we have all of these safety videos too.
Hi, this is Bruce Colton, the other safety officer for Angel Flight West, and I wanted to describe to you what I would call probably a macho attitude that happened to me quite a few years ago. Um I was flying an old Bonanza that I'd owned for many years, and I was IFR current, and I wanted to take my daughter on one of these IFR flights just to go someplace. So we flew up to Santa Rosa from Reed Hillview Airport in San Jose, and the weather was much more challenging than I was expecting. It was very bumpy. Um, I did do a weather briefing, and it was probably a little worse than I was expecting, but also my IFR capabilities were probably a little less than I was planning on. We didn't actually have any I'll say, serious excursions or anything, but it was a pretty bumpy flight and very rainy. And when we landed at Santa Rosa, uh, we got some really heavy rain that lasted about half an hour. We just sat in the airplane and waited for the rain to stop. But I reflect on that flight a lot about that. First of all, I was exposing this my daughter to sort of my sense of adventure to go fly IFR in my airplane, but also doing the flight when it was probably the weather was less desirable than I really wanted to her to encounter, and I think it scared her a little bit too. So anyway, I just wanted to mention that it can happen to everybody, and we can we need to think about that every time we fly. Thanks.
Thank you, Bruce. That's just a great example, and I think we all have one of those, right? At
Yeah,
least one of those, and I know I do. It will take too long to describe them, and I think that's again goes to the saying that we don't wake up in the morning thinking, "I'm going to go scare my daughter today." That wasn't your thought process at all. Yet it creeped up, right? And that's the and look, the beauty
exactly.
is here you are years later, and you're still debriefing it. That's awesome.
Right.
That's the
Thanks.
thing.
Anyone else? Questions, comments?
Yeah, can you hear me okay, Stuart?
Yes, we can hear you, Stuart.
Yeah, I'd like to bring up something that was came up a few years ago about related to safety, and that is pilots ensuring that their own health is appropriate for the flight. We had an Angel Flight member, unfortunately, a couple of years ago, who had been having, in his 50s, been having some occasional mild chest pains. His girlfriend asked that he get checked up. And a few days later, he was going to take her up for a lesson, and he didn't show up, and they found him dead in his apartment from a coronary. So I think pilots need to be aware that they need to, their own health and condition is something that needs to be attended to and not overlooked for fear of looking weak or possibly getting their medical yanked. It's not worth your life.
Thank you. Yeah, that is it's ironic. We are probably as pilots we're more afraid of a doctor than we are of a thunderstorm. It's very common. So that's a great message. Thank you.
Thank you, Stuart. Good to see you.
Good to see you too.
Any other questions from the group? You can feel free to shout them out, or put it in the comments as well. You can message us and we'll get to them.
Great. Well, quiet group today, but you have Alexi's email. We can send this out again after the town hall as well. Oh, we have someone. Let's see. Alejandro, do you want to take that?
Yeah. So Jerry Kramer said, I think that we have all had that feeling of not wanting to let the patient passenger down. It is so hard to overcome. I had one last year that I probably should have canceled, but ended up landing 30 miles short of destination and paying for an Uber. And yeah, Alexi, if you want to speak to that.
Yeah, that's good for you, actually, but good for you for thinking about it still, right? That's indicative of your awareness. And that is the highest threat in philanthropic flying, without a doubt. One thing I would say is, we've talked about this before. The definition of learning is when we have an experience that changes our behavior. Now, we tend to think that, oh, learning is when we learn something positive, but that's not true. We can have an experience that changes our behavior in a way that is not conducive to good decisions in the future. So if we keep taking risks, let's say you didn't do that. I'm saying if you were taking risks continuously and flying flights that you probably shouldn't fly, but yet typically they will end up okay. It's kind of like Bruce, right? He landed in Santa Rosa and they were sitting in the airplane with the rain. It ended up okay, but because he's such a self-aware individual, he's thinking about it and he's saying, I probably shouldn't have done that. But it is possible that kind of learning that experience that changes our behavior will change it in a negative way. So sometimes actually making the decision of a sure loss and saying, no, I'm not going to operate this flight, you just taught yourself something that it is not only acceptable, but commendable to refuse a flight. And I'm not saying go out there and refuse flights, but sometimes if you do it, and most of us tend to beat ourselves up for it afterwards, right? We say, I could have flown this flight. You need to stop doing that. You need to say, I just learned a good lesson. That I had an experience that changed my behavior for the better. So I try to shift the narrative a little bit on that decision-making process. So good for you.
And just to add a little about the flight coordination side of things, we are always happy when pilots are making the safe call, and we are always in communication with patients. So we're figuring things out and pivoting to plan Bs, and we have that set ahead of time, and we even are really good at doing it on the fly. So we're so happy to take things from there if you need to cancel for any reason, even if it's the last minute. So yeah, I really appreciate your insight on that, Jerry, and thank you, Alexi, as well.
Yeah, that's without a doubt my spiel to every new Angel Flight West pilot is something, and I'm not just saying this because you're all here. I've never witnessed such commitment to that kind of um, that kind of environment where the cancellation disposition is so free, so available, and so free without any consequence. It's wonderful. And you keep doing it, so it's admirable. So that's an important piece for all new command pilots to know that there's always going to be a plan B. Always, always, always.